What's up? I'm back. Okay, I'm gonna just wait for you guys to join again, and then if I didn't get to a question, just ask it, and we'll get back to it. Thank you guys for taking your morning to spend it with me. Hello. If I didn't get to your guys' question, just feel free to ask it again. I'm bound to Instagram's 1 hour live, and so I gotta kind of hack it. All right, thank you guys for joining me again. I appreciate you guys taking your time. Okay, what water filter do you like? Yeah, so there's a couple options. I think that it really depends on your living situation. So if you're renting, you're obviously not going to install something under the sink. So if you're renting, a Berkey filter can be really helpful. But if you're not, if that's like out of your budget range and that's something you kind of need to save for a while, there's a pitcher that's kind of like a Brita, but it's called AquaGear. And it is like a little bit more pricier than a Brita. It's I think $69, but it is kind of a lower cost option for if you're like wanting to filter as much stuff from your water as possible. The AquaGear pitcher can be helpful. And then if you actually own your house or you can install something under the sink, I recommend the Aquasana reverse osmosis filter with a remineralizer. So it just kind of depends on your living situation, but you definitely want to make sure chlorine and fluoride are out of your water. What do you think of sugar-free gum? I think that gum is kind of devastating to the gut. You guys have to understand that when your tongue tastes sweetness, digestion starts in the mouth. Does not start when something hits the stomach. It starts in the mouth. When we begin to taste something on our tongue is very sensitive, has a lot of receptors on it. And then our saliva is full of enzymes that help us start to break down carbohydrates when we start chewing. So the minute we start chewing and taste sweetness, our body immediately sends insulin into the body to prepare for the blood sugar. Then what happens? No sugar hits the body, no fuel hits the body. Oh no, what's gonna happen? We have to raise stress hormones, break down glucose, and it's like that pattern. So the minute you start chewing something, guys, unfortunately, your body starts to prime and prep for digestion. It utilizes digestive enzymes, it utilizes hydrochloric acid, and when there's no food that hits the body, all that stuff goes to waste. So when you actually go to eat an hour later or 2 hours later, you are going to not be able to digest that food as well. In addition to it, it's just a bad habit. It's something that you're constantly using saliva. You're probably experiencing more cravings than you think you are because of sugar-free gum. Overall, I actually have a post if you scroll back on gum chewing. I'm definitely not a fan. It really, really messes up digestive function long term. I mean, like an occasional piece of gum is not a problem. It's more just like a habit. And a lot of people are not like having the occasional piece of gum. They're like chewing gum like all the time, constantly. They do it like once or twice or 3 times a day or constantly, and that's just, in my opinion, like a big no-no. Could congenital adrenal hyperplasia be the only reason of irregular periods and high androgens? Absolutely. I'm not really sure exactly about that condition causing those things, but anything having to do with the adrenal glands and stress hormones like cortisol can absolutely affect all the other hormones, so of course it could. What can I do to support my body after a cold? If you've had a cold and then you're back, like, just go back to normal. If you have a cold, then I personally drink a lot of bone broth, a lot of ginger tea, apple cider vinegar, lots of lemon, lots of fluids that are mineral rich, lots of fruits, just easy to digest and absorb. So blood pressure is mostly due to stress. So think about what happens when your blood pressure is high, your body's pumping blood, right? There's a lot of oxygenation having to occur. And so I always say what's going on. Usually it's just mineral deficiencies, honestly. Like implementing something as simple as just like trace minerals, potassium and vitamin K is enough to get blood pressure down. Almost always, like seriously, potassium, vitamin K. And it's like, boom. Bye-bye blood pressure, and it's just a lot of times a deficiency or the body's trying to compensate for something. Definitely a sodium deficiency, like one of the worst recommendations on the planet is like people that have high blood pressure to restrict salt. I always see them like their blood pressure getting 10 times worse, and I'm like, yeah, duh. So Himalayan pink salt, Celtic sea salt, all those high quality salts, and then a potassium supplement, like I like Trace Minerals Research Drops, and then vitamin K2, which I like Mary Ruth's brand on Amazon. how to start healing metabolic system. How about supporting postpartum Hashimoto's naturally? Yeah, so one step at a time, girly. It's not about how. The question's never how. It's always why. Why is this happening to me in the first place? Why? It's always the question. It's never how. Who cares about how? It's why. That's where you're going to find your answer. When we start trying to focus on that question, how do we heal this? How do we heal this? It's just going to waste our money. We're going to spend tons of money on supplements, tons of money on all these different diets, tons of time frustrated because we're always focusing on the how. We need to focus on the why, and that's where you have to dig deep. You got to look at the pattern. You got to take a step back, do the timeline. When did you start to feel like crap? Was it after you had a baby or was it before? Be real with yourself. If it was before, your pregnancy just depleted you completely, and so then you had the baby, and then if you breastfed, it depleted you more. So okay, we got to go back to the beginning. Metabolic issues started before, and then the depletion that happened during pregnancy just made it worse. So flood the body with nutrients. That's almost always the first thing, is flood the body with nutrients. A lot of times postpartum, I see it very regularly, as women were metabolically unstable before, and then pregnancy doesn't do anything to help that. If anything, it makes it worse. And having a baby is an amazing and incredible thing, and it's something to be so celebrated. But it's also something that you have to understand is so stressful, and if you don't have the stability to do it properly in the first place, you're the one that ends up suffering, because the minute that baby comes in the picture, your body says, oop, you're not the priority anymore, my baby is. And your body will pull from the bones, pull from the heart, it will pull nutrients from wherever it needs to make sure that your baby will survive. Because the minute that baby comes in the picture, you have now carried on the human race. Your job is done. And your body's like, who cares? I need to get this baby out alive, and it needs to continue to carry it on. So keeping that in mind, we have to not let that scare us, but in addition say our body probably sacrificed a lot of ourselves in order to give our baby what it needed. And so we have to go back and kind of lay the foundation again. We've got to go back and flood the body with nutrients. We've got to lower the stress response. After a baby, you got to make sure that your prolactin levels are normal. That's a big one, because prolactin is a stress hormone. A lot of times they call it the mothering hormone, and I'm like, probably not. So we got to make sure that prolactin is in a normal range. If you're having Hashimoto's or thyroid issues, then remember that estrogens are really harmful to the thyroid. Polyunsaturated fats, specifically from like industrial seed oils, canola, safflower, sunflower, all that kind of stuff is out. And then make sure that you are eating metabolically enhancing foods. Easy to digest, easy to break down, easy to absorb and use it as energy. A lot of times in a place where there's thyroid issues going on, there's also stress hormones going on. So your goal is to consistently eat well. And then I know, like with a baby, sleep is so affected, and that's a huge one. So make sure you kind of work out, if you have a partner that's with you within this, make sure you work something out with him or her. Make sure that you are make sure that you're working something out where you can get some quality sleep at least once a day. Like you can lay down for a nap when they get home from work, or you can, they can make dinner while you rest, or, you gotta work something out, because a lot of women, we take on everything and we act like, oh, it's no big deal. I can cook dinner and I can, breastfeed the baby and I can do, I'm like, no. You just pushed a baby out of your vagina, or you were cut open, and either way, you deserve a medal. So you need to make sure that the other person is pulling their ropes too, for sure. And you need sleep. I know those night feedings can be really hard, and I know that, obviously your baby needs to eat. I'm not saying that you're going to be like, I'm just going to sleep, no problem. It's more like, try to set your environment up for success. Stop turning on bright lights when you wake up. What the heck? Use a Himalayan pink salt lamp, and do not turn on lights. Are you kidding me? Your baby's not going to go back to sleep, and neither are you. That's the first thing that's got to go. The second thing is, don't be on your phone scrolling while you're breastfeeding in the middle of the night. Worst thing ever, because you get on that dopamine loop, and then you're just like, you're wide awake. listen to a podcast, read a book, listen to a book on tape, but do not look at your phone and do not turn on lights. You will see your sleep radically change just by those two things. The next thing is like postpartum, you've got to make sure your progesterone levels are good, because progesterone is anti-inflammatory and it is also thyroid supportive. And so those are the two things that are happening when you have Hashimoto's, is your thyroid struggling and you probably don't have, you're inflamed, so you probably don't have enough progesterone. So that's something that needs to be checked out. But overall, everything that I talk about here applies to you, if not more, because now you're stressed, you're probably feeding your baby constantly, and so you have more nutrient needs and you have more, more needs to support a healthy metabolism. You're burning through fuel all the time. How long does it take to see pulse rate lower? Mine is usually 95 to 100, and I know you say that's due to the body being stressed. Yeah, so that is quite a high reading, a regular reading. This is different for every person. So a lot of people start taking their pulse and they're like, wow, I didn't realize how stressed I am. Start taking your pulse 40 minutes after a meal. Start seeing how your meals are affecting you. Are they raising your pulse rate or lowering your pulse rate? If they're lowering your pulse rate, that's a good sign. You want to keep eating. You want to keep getting that pulse rate down. Check how deep breathing affects your pulse rate. Start to pay attention and track what's affecting your pulse rate positively or negatively, and start doing more of that, and then watch it. Sometimes when somebody's metabolically compromised, you don't know how long your stress hormones have been at play. You don't know how long that pulse rate has been so high. So, let's say it's been that way for 5 years. It's probably going to take more than a couple weeks to get it back down. So it just kind of depends, but you want to start seeing the patterns of your body, how that pulse rate is being affected by certain habits, and do those habits that are lowering it. Do the habits that are lowering stress. What's your take on CBD oil? I'm neutral on it. I don't think it's like the, Jesus reincarnated, but I don't think it's necessarily bad. It's just one of those things where I've seen people get worse on it, but then I've also seen people see amazing results with it. So who am I to say that CBD is bad or good? It's more like very relative to the person. It's one of those things that's really expensive too, so you got to make sure that, if you're going to buy it, it's working for you. I don't think it's worth taking a supplement that doesn't give you any clear benefits. In addition, make sure it's organic, make sure you're paying attention to the additives. If you're not taking a tincture, a vape is helpful, because taking a pill makes all of that have to go through the digestive system to get to the liver, and eventually sometimes it's not as potent. So a tincture under the tongue tends to be the most potent, as is absorbed through the lungs. So it's just one of those things where you have to kind of decide for yourself if it's worth it for you. My opinion doesn't really matter. Eating fruit daily and ice cream at times after a few months lower carb, what should I feel changing? You should feel stable, metabolically stable a little bit more. You should feel more alert, more vibrant. I almost find that the first thing that starts to change is people just feel like my energy just is slightly different. I almost feel more open, more outgoing, a little bit more just happy to be alive. You should also see your extremities warming up, especially if you have had regularly cold feet. But again, this is why I recommend tracking temps and pulse. You can really see the small gradual changes in temperatures and pulse, whereas sometimes symptoms don't always get better. But again, you need to know what your reason was for implementing more carbohydrates. Was it to warm yourself up? Was it for more mental clarity? Was it for hormonal stability? Did you have different imbalanced hormones? Did you have a stress response, anxiety, sleeplessness, waking up nauseous? What were your purposes? You should start to see your symptoms maybe slowly improve. And that's what I would look at. Then I would also look at the warmth of your hands and feet, your heat production. Are you sleeping better, more deeply? It's almost the goal here, you guys, is to get to that metabolic place of remember when you were a kid and you would wake up with all that energy and you're I'm good to go, I'm ready, I'm in a good mood. And then the minute that you were tired, you would just take a nap and crash. You'd sleep, then you're ready again. That is what a normal metabolism should look like. It should not be I'm slow to wake up, and then like, my day sucks, and then it's like, that is not, you're not living a quality life there, girl. That's not quality life. If you're not waking up with energy and then, making it through your day, and then when it's time to sleep, hitting the sack and sleeping well, there's a problem. And so those are usually the first things that I want people to feel, is like they're starting to see that improvement. Like, I'm waking up with energy. I'm waking up feeling good about myself for the first time in a long time. More positivity, more joy, honestly. And it's not necessarily like, if anything, when you tie in more carbohydrates, in my opinion, it's like, if anything, it should teach you that carbs are not bad. Carbs don't make you blow up like a huge balloon, like everyone's saying. Carbs aren't the devil. And I can have a lot more joy with a lot more freedom, and I'm okay, like nobody died. So I don't really know what your goals were tying in carbs, but that's kind of where it would start into what you're trying to see get better. Hey Jessica, I'm struggling with missing ovulation and irregular cycles. No reason found till now. I have low potassium, progesterone, DHEAS, and testosterone. Could it be adrenal fatigue? Adrenal fatigue does not exist. So your adrenals do not fatigue. What happens is when you have low cortisol, if you have low cortisol, at one point or for a long time, cortisol was high, and your body finally just said, we gotta like lower cortisol with some other hormones. We have to adapt, because if cortisol stays high for too long, your body continues to break itself down. And so adrenal fatigue does not exist. That's why we call it HPA axis dysfunction, because the brain is finally sending signals to the endocrine glands that something needs to shift hormonally. So low potassium is usually due to you're either not absorbing minerals well from low stomach acid. So are you on a plant-based diet? Are you eating lots of nuts and seeds and a lot of plant oils? Remember, that suppresses digestive function, suppresses hydrochloric acid, suppresses digestive enzymes. So you're not absorbing the minerals from your food very well. Are you eating lots of raw fruits and vegetables? That could be the case. Again, they're very difficult to digest and absorb. And so even if you're digesting them okay, are you absorbing them quick enough to give your body proper amounts of fuel? So, again, like these kinds of questions, it's so difficult for me to answer just by knowing just these scant details. A lot of times it takes me like combing through a health history and seeing like, okay, what's the whole picture? What did you do a year ago? What did you do 2 years ago? I like to see what has happened over the course of time, and a lot of times I can pinpoint at some time when things started to go downhill, and a lot of women don't realize it until I point it out, and they're like, oh, I get it. A lot of times it's like, for example, like I just had a client yesterday who said, I went raw vegan 2 years ago and I felt really good, and I didn't really think it was a problem. And then I'm like, but did your issues start happening? And she's like, yeah, like about 4 or 5 months after I did that. And I was like, there it is, so, you kind of like some maybe in your mind meaningless changes or meaningless habit changes that you maybe thought didn't even apply might be the thing. So it's like you kind of have to really comb through your habits. Like, what are you eating? Is it traditional? Is it metabolically stable? Or is it based on what everyone's promoting in the health and wellness community right now? Is it Are you in a relationship that you hate? Are you getting enough sunlight? Are you feeling supported? Are you really stressed out with your job? Are you eating enough saturated fats? Are you protein deficient? A lot of women with low hormones don't realize they're not eating enough protein at all. You need at least 100 grams when you're trying to heal of bioavailable sources. So if you're getting most of your protein from plant sources, it's probably not being absorbed or digested very well. So there's just so many little caveats. And I find that most of my clients that come to me are not eating unhealthy. They're not coming from a standard American diet. Most of my clients have been on their health journey for quite some time, and they think they're doing everything right. But they're doing everything right according to an online guru or this or that, not according to their body and science. So, you have to make sure that what you're eating and what you're doing is biologically accurate. What did your great-grandmother do? That's what you do. And it's not like, it's not like what so-and-so says to do or so-and-so says to do. We got to really make sure that what habits we're doing and what nutrition we're consuming is biologically accurate, meaning our cells respond to it. I don't care if blah, blah, blah happens or blah, blah, blah. What are your cells doing? And a lot of times we realize, oh, we're not digesting and absorbing anything we're eating, or oh, we're inflamed, or oh, this is irritating, or oh, I'm not getting enough sunlight, which is something that sounds very simple, but it's incredibly stressful. So I recommend, like, when you're struggling with some kind of hypometabolic condition like that, or your hormones are kind of all over the place, start tracking your temperatures and pulse. Start seeing how your food's affecting you. You know, take your temperature and pulse 40 minutes after a meal. Start kind of checking in with those metabolic signals. How are your hands and feet? Are they cold, or are your extremities freezing? Is your nose always freezing? Your ears always freezing? Start kind of looking into those things and see if your body's producing heat, because healthy cells that are metabolizing nutrients very quickly, they're going to produce a heck of a ton of heat, and that's what we want. How to convince my doctor to test the whole thyroid panel. You tell them that TSH is a hormone that's secreted by the pituitary gland. It is not a thyroid hormone. So how doctor, are you going to test my thyroid if you're testing a pituitary hormone? Tell them that and they're going to be like, okay. But they should at least be testing TSH, T4, and T3. And you can tell them the science. Say, TSH tells the thyroid to make T4, doctor, and then T4 gets sent to the liver to be converted into T3. So, and then T3 is what puts, actually helps metabolism in the cells, doctor. So how do I know that TSH is translating to T4? And how do I know if that T4 is being converted into T3? And they're going to be like, I'm not sure, because they probably don't know that. Tips to help vaginitis. I'm assuming it's like a bacterial infection. It really depends, you kind of got to get to the bottom, but a lot of times bacterial infection like vaginitis or bacterial vaginosis or even yeast infections usually stem to the gut, from the gut to the gut, from the gut. So what we have to understand is that our sinus passageways, our lungs, and our vaginas are other places that are both warm and wet, mucousy. They're a perfect place for bacterial imbalance or fungal imbalance to occur, because the minute that the pH gets off, or the minute that one bacteria kind of gets ahead of all the others, is the minute that we start to get yeasty or imbalanced or that kind of thing. So it really depends on what your other symptoms are like. I mean, if you have a lot of gut symptoms, it could just be what's happening in the gut and it's getting all the way to the vaginal canal. I recommend doing you can do probiotic suppositories. I don't know what if your doctor has prescribed you anything for it. It's kind of one of those things what have you taken and what has helped and what has not helped. So there's a lot of things that could occur, but usually a little gut work like oregano oil and what I showed earlier, those monolaurin pellets, can be very helpful. Just a general bacterial cleanse, berberine, anything that's going to kill bacteria in the gut usually will translate into the vagina. But I will say, never ever douche. A lot of women will douche with herbs or something like that. I'm like, oh my God, don't mess with the balance in there, because once you start, it's probably already slightly imbalanced, but once you take control and you start really messing with the imbalance, that's when it gets worse. What's your take on pork and lard? It just depends on what that pig ate, girl. So, a pasture-raised animal that's treated really well and is eating food that they're meant to eat is usually fine. But a pig that's fed soybean or corn oil or corn, their fat is going to literally be just straight up polyunsaturated corn oil. If that pig just ate corn all the time, their fat is literally corn oil. So, what free fatty acids are stored up in their fat cells matter, and what matters there is what they were eating. But if it's a pastured animal or a high quality animal, then it's probably great. What might cause cloudy urine? A lot of times that's a stress response, norepinephrine, adrenaline, that kind of thing. But it can also be what kind of vitamins are you taking? Are you taking a lot of B vitamins or something like that? So just kind of depends. It can be from something that you're taking, but it can also be because of stress hormones or blood sugar imbalances, sugar in the urine, that kind of thing. Do you recommend laser hair removal as a symptomatic treatment until healing the real issue? Yeah, I mean, I recommend doing whatever works for you and whatever gives you the most confidence for removing your hair. It's really very personal. That's a personal decision. So, like, I don't think anyone should ever make you feel bad about your method of hair removal. If you want to wax, if you want to do laser hair removal, if you want to do whatever it is, that is your prerogative, and absolutely, you shouldn't just like be like, I'm just gonna deal with all this hair growth and just let it grow naturally, like, because I'm just so natural, you know, like, I'm just so freaking natural. Like, I feel like some people get shamed for feeling like they can't do something that's like not super natural, and I'm like, no, if you want to do laser hair removal, go for it. If you want to shave or wax or thread or whatever, absolutely do it. Hi, going low carb keto has completely changed my mood and energy levels for the better, like much, much better. How can this be explained? You know, the benefits from keto and low carb is that you are starving the bacteria in your gut that were causing the insulin resistance and the problem in the first place. That is the problem. But when you're starving those bacteria, you're not fixing the problem. Because if you go back to eating carbs and you're experiencing the same issues as you were before, then the problem wasn't fixed. Do you see how I'm saying, like, low carb and keto can sometimes be a band-aid solution? If you go back to eating carbs and you're still insulin resistance wasn't healed. Nothing changed. It's just that you were stopped eating something that was contributing to the problem. Does that make that carbs bad, or does that make the fact that you have an overgrowth of bacteria bad? Remember, when you feed those bacteria in your gut and there's bad bacteria or dysbiotic bacteria, they create something called lipopolysaccharides, LPS, and you can Google that. They are also called endotoxins. These endotoxins, these LPS, usually get sent to the liver, and the liver can handle it. When the gut's imbalanced, meaning there's too much bacteria creating too much LPS, or the liver cannot handle these, they get into general circulation. And where do they go? They go to your cell and they inflame the heck out of your cells. Your cells are incredibly stressed out, and they will not burn glucose properly, and they will become resistant to insulin. And this can lead to mood imbalances, blood sugar imbalances, etc. So what is the problem? Is the problem the carbs? Hell no. Your body prefers to burn glucose, but when it can't burn glucose, it's already kind of preferentially burning free fatty acids. And so when you just say, okay, I'm going to restrict glucose altogether and just give my body fats, then your body continues to do what it was doing. Does that mean that that was right? It's kind of like saying, like, catering to an imbalance. So all these people that are on, I mean, the reason why I speak out about low carb and keto so often, I'm not against it. I want you guys to do what works for you and what is best for you. But I've seen story after story after story after story. I mean, this is like, to me, like, I wish I didn't get an email once a week of a woman saying, I was low carb for a year and now, like, my hair's falling out so quickly I can't get it to stop. And we test their thyroid and we test her adrenals and everything's just in the trash can. Like, in the trash can. And that's going to take a year or 2 years to heal. And this is not like me trying to scare you. It's just me like saying, please be conscious. Please be aware. Are you ovulating? Are you feeling better? Like, I personally did keto for 4 months and felt better mood-wise at first. Like, I felt great. And then all of a sudden, like, I began to feel just like a lesser version of myself. Like, I just didn't feel really energized. And anytime I ate carbohydrates, I couldn't tolerate them at all. They went right through me. And I saw that as a problem. I saw that as like, my body's not healing. My body's getting worse. If anything, I'm getting more food sensitivities. I'm more reactive to certain foods. I have to, like, stick to this very, very restricted diet in order to feel good. And that's not okay. That's not okay. And so just be real with yourself. But if you truly feel better, you feel better. And that's amazing and incredible. And keep with it. Everybody is a little bit different, and it's okay to do what feels best to you. But again, it's one of those things where, were the carbs the problem, or is there another problem that's just being covered up with a Band-Aid? And if that's the case, then you don't want to let that problem continue to get worse. Because what I find is that, like, eventually keto begins to fail. It's not like at first. If a diet makes you feel good at first, almost all diets make you feel good at first. It's the sustainability. It's the lasting nature of that diet. Does 6 months down the line, a year down the line, leave you as vital as you were before? That is the question that you want to ask. And if the answer to that question is absolutely, then go for it. I've heard you mention that apple cider vinegar and baking soda helped with SIBO and H. pylori. How long did you use it? I thought apple cider vinegar was a no-no with SIBO since it ferments. Well, it's just the vinegar and the baking soda mixture, so it turns into something completely different. It's called a chemical reaction or chemistry, and so when you combine vinegar solution and baking soda, you get something called sodium acetate, and sodium acetate can kill bacteria. Sometimes it's effective at killing H. pylori. That personally is what worked for me, but I had tried a lot of other things before and didn't really find a lot of benefits from it. So that really helped for me. But I used it pretty consistently for a couple of months. I can't remember exactly how long. Do you use the Instant Pot to make bone broth? I don't, because I don't have an Instant Pot, but I've heard a lot of people do, and I think that's probably fine. I haven't really looked into if it changes anything. But yeah, I mean, if you're pressed for time and you prefer to use the Instant Pot, go for it. I just don't have one. Apparently I live in the Stone Age and use a crock pot. And that's just my, I just hate getting gadgets that I don't need, and I'm not I don't know, I don't think I would use the Instant Pot. That's why I don't have it. But if you have one, go for it, man. That would be awesome. Is it normal that temperature taken under the tongue is 98.6, but underarm is only 97.1? What's the best spot to take your temperature? Yeah, the mouth tends to be a lot warmer than the armpit, and that's why sometimes I just recommend doing oral temperature. It's a little bit more accurate, because unless you're really sticking that thermometer really deep in your armpit, it's gonna be less accurate. You'll find that if you stuck your thermometer pretty deep, it would be a higher reading. So I just recommend taking it orally. But if you want to do your armpit, you're just gonna do your armpit, and you're gonna stick with your armpit. You want to do either one and be consistent with it. But I just recommend taking it orally. It's a little bit more accurate. Can we please see more of your meals that you eat, please, if you have time? Absolutely. I will regularly share my meals, but I'll be honest, you guys, I eat something pretty similar regularly. I think that all these people's obsession with food on Instagram, I guess if it's your hobby, cool, but I think that being obsessed with food just equals just that, obsession with food. So I eat foods that I enjoy, and I eat them pretty regularly. It's a lot of fruit, a lot of just easy to do meats like grass-fed burgers or roast or crock pot chicken, bone broth, collagen, fruits, fruit juices, squashes, potatoes, sweet potatoes, cooked greens. That's pretty much all I eat, and I do it in different combinations, and I'm always satisfied because I get to do lots of very rich foods like butter and cream and raw milk and things like that. What do you think of Ovasitol for PCOS? Does it really help? It can. So inositol, which is what Ovasitol is made of, is vitamin B8. And when you're under a lot of stress, which PCOS is a stress-based condition, it's being driven by metabolic stress, you do deplete your B vitamins very quickly. And in some women, they're depleting one of their B vitamins is vitamin B8 or inositol. The body makes inositol, but sometimes if you're going through it too quickly, you're not making enough or you're depleted. And so that's why some women see benefit, because by implementing that, it's actually restoring some of their B vitamins or that B vitamin that was depleted. But you don't have to take Ovasitol. Inositol is plenty. A lot of people always think the more pricier the supplement, the better. There's a lot of people that give you a coupon code for things like Ovasitol, and so they're making a kickback on that. But it's so expensive. I would never buy it myself personally. And it's not the golden ark of the covenant like people act like it is. So it's one of those things where try it once. If it helps, just take it consistently and see how one round of it helps. And if it helps, great, it works. But if not, don't waste your money on it. But I find that using myo-inositol is just as helpful as Ovasitol. And it doesn't work for everyone, though. That's the thing. Don't feel like you've been convinced that this is the thing that's going to help me, and then it doesn't help. You want to make sure that it does truly help you. And the only way to do that is to feel feel it out and see the actual results. I always get a lot of phlegm after I eat. What does this mean? Usually that's like inflammation, like there's maybe some gut issues going on. A lot of times bacteria will actually work, like mess with your sinuses and mess with your like your saliva. It'll almost make it like thicker and stringy. So what are you eating? Are you eating things that are bothering you or inflaming you? That's the biggest thing. Like, what are you eating and is it working for you well? What type of carbs do you eat and what are easy to digest foods? So easy to digest foods are just things that are not like super high amounts of roughage. Like you kind of want things that are pre-broken down. So I don't eat a lot of nuts and seeds. I don't eat a lot of raw vegetables, like almost at all. I'm not a cow. And then I don't ever eat like polyunsaturated like vegetable oils, things like that. And then if I do grains, like I make sure they're like it's like pre-broken down, like for example like sourdough bread or sprouted instant oatmeal, like it's been sprouted, it's been fermented, and it's been broken down. That's like what I stick to for grains, like white rice that doesn't have the bran, that kind of thing, and I cook it in bone broth. And then like carbohydrate wise, I stick to mostly roots and fruits. I always make sure that my fruits are in season and ripe. If they're frozen, they were picked in season. And then I do like root vegetables, sweet potatoes, carrots, parsnips, beets, turnips, that kind of thing. And then I'll do like occasionally when I feel like it, cooked greens, cooked like broccoli or Brussels sprouts or things. I just always make sure those foods are very, very well cooked so that my body has an easier time breaking them down. But I only eat them when I crave them. And I find that when I implemented dairy products back into my diet, I didn't really crave greens as much because I was getting enough calcium. When you're not getting enough calcium, you tend to crave a lot of greens and like cruciferous vegetables and things like that. So I eat them when I crave them, which is not often any longer. And then I do lots of like I don't want to say lots of. I'll do like Greek yogurt. Think baby food, like easy to break down foods. Like I like yogurt. I like cottage cheese. I like Greek yogurt. I like using ricotta on some things, mozzarella, that kind of thing. I like slow cooked eggs or soft boiled eggs in like ghee and grass-fed butter. I do lots of bone broth. I do lots of collagen. I just do foods that I can like easily digest and absorb very quickly, and then have been kind of pre-broken down for me. I'm opting for nutrient-dense foods. And then I do like meats, high-quality meats, whether it's like in a roast or I just saute some ground beef or, bake it into meatballs or meatloaf or something like that. I just take the very basics and then I make meals out of them. But yeah, easy to digest foods are going to be foods that don't have a lot of fibrous material that make it difficult for your body to digest. Because remember, fibrous foods offer very little nutrition and require tons of energy to break down. And so if you're already energy deficient, that just is energy that you don't have to spend. So I don't recommend, like, a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, you don't eat greens, like you don't eat a vegetable with every meal. And I'm like, I try to get a vegetable when I want one, but I always do like roots and fruits. So there's lots of vitamins and minerals that are easier to break down there. And then if I feel like a green, my body's going to tell me that I need it and I will eat it. But a lot of times, like, who actually like craves like kale, raw kale? Like you have an aversion to it naturally. Like you feed that to a baby and they're like, and it's like, when did we like learn to override our natural aversions? Like there are certain foods on the market that you have to understand, you guys, came from the Great Depression. When the Great Depression hit, there were very little animal foods, very little saturated fats like dairy available. And so what were we forced to eat? We were forced to eat cereal grains. We were forced to eat beans and rice. We were forced to eat greens because they were cheap. That doesn't necessarily mean they were good. The dietary guidelines actually came from the Great Depression, and that's when they decided that we can, people could live off these foods. They're cheap, they're easy to produce, and we can live off them. Cool. Does that mean they were like, wow, their metabolisms are working very efficiently with these cereal grains and these greens? No, it was that those were the foods that they promoted for political reasons because they we could not eat animal foods because they were not available. And so the government was trying to figure out how humans could subsist during this depression, during the place where food was scarce. How could we subsist? And we could, oh, well, they can survive on grains and beans and, you know, dried foods because they would last, right? They could pass those out when people were going to these food shelters and things. Did that mean that they were like, wow, this is optimal nutrition for humans? No. And so that's actually where this idea of like whole grains and dried beans and things comes from. And it's something that we have to decide if you know, we tolerate those foods well and we get enough nutrients from those foods well. Is there a way to supplement progesterone if we're not cycling, or should it be used during the luteal phase? Yeah, so usually like if you go to your doctor and get progesterone, they will tell you to, if you're not cycling, to just kind of choose 2 weeks where you take it, like 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off, just to kind of mimic a natural cycle until you get it back. I always recommend like going a step further and going all the way back to your last menstrual cycle. And then count 2 weeks before that, and that's when you ovulated. And then you want to like count to where you are now in your cycle. Like just act like you had a 28-day cycle every time and see where you would naturally maybe ovulate, and then start then. But that's a little bit more, I know it's a little bit more complicated, but if you're truly trying to go with the natural, your natural cycle, then that can be helpful. Hi, I was prescribed Synthroid due to suspected Hashimoto. I'm reluctant to take. Doctor said take and come back in 2 months and see where we are at. Any other alternatives? Yeah, so when you get prescribed Synthroid, you need to understand that it's just T4. So you don't know if your body is converting that into T3 until you make sure that you check TSH, T4, and T3. Because you want to make sure that your conversion of T4 into T3 is going to be helpful, or that does nothing, right? Like supplementing a hormone that your body can't convert is not going to be very helpful for your symptoms. When TSH is high, we have to understand that the body's under stress. TSH is a hormone that the pituitary gland secretes. It's not a thyroid hormone. And so when TSH is high, you need to understand there's other stressors involved. You have to ask yourself, where's that stress coming from? And that's why when you test hormones, you don't just test one thing. When you test thyroid, you don't just test thyroid. You want to make sure your progesterone levels are good, your estrogen levels, your testosterone levels. And then on the flip side, you also want to look at stress hormones. How's cortisol? How's prolactin? How's all those? And a lot of times you'll see something else is imbalanced, not just the thyroid. But a lot of times with Hashimoto's, it's stemming from the gut, it's stemming from the liver. The body's not converting T4 to T3 well, which is going to lead to more inflammation. The slower gut motility happens when, the less T3 you have, the slower things are moving through your gut, the more likely it is for bacteria and fungus to start to proliferate. And then you're getting inflammation stemming from the gut. The liver can't handle those inflammatory compounds, sending them to the bloodstream. The cells inflame. Usually the thyroid, we call it the canary in the coal mine. It's the first thing to start to react to inflammation, metabolic stressors, heavy metals, a poor diet, that kind of thing. And so when we see like a thyroid condition, we need to make sure it's an actual thyroid condition and it's not a conversion issue, because conversion of T4, which is the hormone the thyroid makes, into T3 doesn't happen in the thyroid. It happens in the gut and the liver. And so we got to make sure that that's happening. And if you're taking Synthroid and you're not converting into T3, nothing will happen. If anything, it can actually be more stressful. So you just want to make sure you're doing your due diligence, making sure you're converting well. And then, if you're just going to do it for 2 months as a trial, it's all about trusting your gut with medications. I can't tell you guys here what to do or what to not do. That's your job. You guys got to make the decision yourself. Try to give you as much information as possible to do your own research, but then it's up to you to do your own research and trust your gut in that situation. And most of the time when I say, what is your decision? Like, what does your gut say? What do you know is true? And they're like, yeah, no, I already know the answer to this question. So remember, natural desiccated thyroid is almost always available to you if you ask. And then if your doctor won't prescribe like Armour or natural desiccated thyroid or T3, then you can always find a doctor that will. So there are other options besides synthetic thyroid medication. How can I avoid constipation? It happens to me a few times a month. What's going on the day before? Are you stressed? Is your metabolic function low? Remember, the biggest reason people struggle with constipation is either a bacterial overgrowth in the gut or things are just slowly moving through the gut. So an easy transit time test is steam yourself a beet, eat a beet for lunch and see how long it takes for your poop to be red. I know, okay, poop talk, but you gotta, like, let's just chat about it. How fast is food moving through your gut? If it's taken more than 24 hours for you to see that beet, there's a motility issue going on. Things are moving very slowly. And then you have to ask yourself, why are things moving slowly? If your body does not need fuel, why do you think your body's going to have things move through quickly? There's no need for that fuel, to extract that fuel in a timely manner. So metabolic function plays a huge role. This is why whenever someone struggles with constipation, I always say, when was the last time you got your thyroid checked? When was the last time you took your temperatures? When was the last time you checked how the things that actually determine how quickly things move through? If your thyroid's good, if your progesterone levels are good, if your adrenals are good, if stress is low, how are you digesting your food? Are there chunks of food in your stool? Is it floating, or is it just hard? Then in that case, you kind of want to look to bacteria. You want to look to bacteria both in the large intestine and the small intestine. A lot of people with constipation, diarrhea, or IBS, they will suffer from small intestinal bacteria overgrowth because it's just the nature of things. If things are slowly moving through the gut, of course things are going to ferment and rot eventually in that small intestine where it doesn't belong, because constipation leads to that ileocecal valve, that one-way valve in between the small intestine and the large intestine, to get stuck open. Bacteria starts crawling in, and there it goes into the small intestine. And then on top of it, stress and low metabolic function leads to low stomach acid and digestive enzyme function, and then bacteria and pathogens are making their way into the small intestine where they're not belonging. So I know, like, I overcomplicate some issues. Like, people are like, oh, just take this. But I'm like, constipation is a serious issue, and it should be taken seriously. It's not just like, oh, I don't poop sometimes. Like, that's a huge issue. Like, if you're not pooping regularly, there's something very wrong. And it's not like something that just needs to, in the meantime, you can drink some aloe vera gel, or you can do like cascara sagrada or like magnesium citrate. But then you also want to get to the bottom of why that's happening. And if it's happening cyclically with certain parts of your cycle, it might have to do with like liver and gallbladder function. What counts as low and high cortisol morning blood take? It really just depends. Testing your blood cortisol is not always as accurate as well as morning. Like, it's great to test in the morning, but you don't know, what happened during the time you got to the lab. You don't know what happened during the rest of the day. So I would just go kind of by the lab ranges. Are you at the low end, or are you at the high end? Those are things to pay attention to. Like, if you're trending really high or trending really low, even if you're in range, it could be a sign that you're on a progression, whether in one direction or the other direction. If you're kind of in the middle, that doesn't mean you're in the clear. Make sure you are checking, how long did it take from you to get from waking up all the way to the lab? How long, what was happening the rest of the day? A lot of people have normal cortisol in the morning and weird cortisol at night, so it's hard to know, but it's kind of one of those things where it's very relative. I don't give you like an exact reading. I would just go by the ranges and then just kind of see the patterns. Is making my own mayo from olive avocado oil okay? I don't see a problem with that. Favorite meal prep, stay-at-home mom with 2 kids. I'm always cooking or cleaning up, making real food, looking for ways to simplify. Yeah, so my rule is cook once, eat 3 times. So make enough so that you can have it for lunch the next day and even maybe dinner the next day. What I do is I keep my meats really simple, because meats tend to be the hardest thing to prepare and cook. And so I keep them very simple so I can repurpose them. So let's say I make a roast one night, I'm gonna have it like roast with carrots and potatoes, what I put in there. And then the next day, I'm gonna maybe put that over some rice and have something like that. And then for dinner, I'm going to take that roast and make tacos for everybody. You know what I mean? So like I try to make things really simple so I could repurpose a meal for multiple things. So then you end up cooking every other day, and that's what I like to do. So, eat once or cook once, eat 3 times. That's kind of my rule. And then in addition, keep things so simple, you guys. Like everything, I know like a lot of women, you got to learn to enjoy simple food. Especially if you live in the Western world, it's like Americans are like, the more the better, the more sauces, the more flavor. And I'm like, learn to enjoy simplicity. Learn to enjoy salt and butter and coconut oil, and stop relying so heavily on just like everything needs to be a different flavor and everything needs to be different. It's like, yeah, it's okay once in a while. It's fine if you like to add variety, but if that variety is literally causing you stress emotionally and mentally, why are you doing it? You know, people have always eaten simply until this culture where we've decided that you need like 18 different flavored nut butters, and I'm like, okay, it's getting a little ridiculous. So if you follow a bunch of people on Instagram that make you feel like every meal has to be a gourmet, like beautiful meal, unfollow, dude. Like, that is just crazy to me. It's so stressful. And then just keep things very simple. Like, learn to enjoy simple foods. Learn to enjoy just simple, nutrient-dense foods. And have an idea of what you're going to eat for breakfast every day. Like, that's the biggest thing. So I'm always like, okay, I'm going to do 2 different breakfasts this week. I'm going to do, Greek yogurt with fruit. And then I'm going to do scrambled eggs on toast. Okay, I have both those things on hand. Cool. What am I going to do for snacks this week? Okay, I'm going to just do my adrenal healing creamsicle, and then I'm going to have some Epic bars on hand so I can eat that with fruit. Like, have an idea in your head of like just what you're going to do. Make sure you have that on hand, and then quick throw together meals. And then for lunch, I almost always eat leftovers. Like, I very rarely make a lunch. I just eat leftovers. Or I'll make like some turkey roll-ups with cheese and turkey, and then have some fruit on the side. Like, just keep things really simple is my biggest thing. And then, if you live in a family where, your husband expects gourmet meals or whatever, it's like one of those things where then make your dinner meal the most flavorful and the most different, and try different things out. But yeah, the biggest thing is just cook once, eat 3 times, and learn to repurpose your meats for different things. Because it's pretty easy to whip up like some roasted sweet potatoes, or saute some potatoes in a pan with onions and bell pepper. It's pretty easy to make a carb. It's pretty easy to bake a plantain. It's pretty easy to roast some broccoli, that kind of thing. But it's a lot more difficult to make the meats. And so that's why like I try to make big batches of meat so that you can repurpose and be just pretty straightforward and simple with your cooking. What would be the connection of menstrual cycle and breakout of cold sores? Your hormones are at their lowest during that time, and a lot of times women don't realize that their blood sugar is a little bit more imbalanced, and that can lead to stress. And a lot of women don't have an appetite when they're on their period as well, and so they decide that their best plan of action is just not to eat. And I'm like, that's probably the worst thing you can do. So again, stick to like foods that are just easy to digest and get down. So if you're like, I'm just not hungry at all, you still gotta be consuming food. And liver detoxification is still important during that time. So, if you were not detoxifying well all through your luteal phase, you're kind of during your menstrual cycle, or the beginning of your menstrual period, you're kind of there to pick up the pieces a little bit. So make sure, remember, like your menstrual cycle, I should stop calling it the menstrual cycle. Your menstrual period is that report card for how your body's doing the whole cycle long. So you want to really be supporting your body up to your period, to make sure that during your period you are immune, your immune system is high and stress is low. Do you recommend checking inflammation blood markers? Yeah, HSCRP, C-reactive protein, and homocysteine levels can be helpful to kind of see where inflammation is at. But even if those are not high, you don't just say like, oh, I don't have any inflammation in my body. Like, a lot of times it takes a long time of inflammation for those markers to start to react. Do you recommend using a glucometer to track blood sugar? I do recommend it. It's a nice tool to see like how your body's clearing sugar, but that's all it tells you. And your morning glucose readings or fasting glucose can sometimes be like, I find that a lot of women have really high blood glucose readings in the morning, and they're taking that as like they have blood sugar imbalances or they have insulin resistance, and I'm like, no, that really shows that you have just high stress hormones. Growth hormone, cortisol, adrenaline, there's a lot of hormones that can affect your your morning blood sugar reading. And so, yeah, you want that to be low, but it's not from blood sugar imbalances necessarily. It's from the fact that your liver has run out of glucose at a certain point, and now your body's compensating and secreting hormones that are actually breaking down tissue to make glucose, and that's why it's high. So it's best to do your like after meal readings 1 hour to 2 hours after a meal. Test your blood glucose just to see how glucose is clearing. That shows you a little bit of an indicator of how well your cells are picking up that glucose and utilizing it. If there's a lot of blood sugar hanging around in the body, it shows the body's not using it that efficiently. But that's what it shows you. It's not like, oh, I have, a lot of people are saying now, like, oh, I have imbalanced blood sugar, I need to eat lower carb. And I'm like, no, you got to get your cells utilizing that sugar. And that happens by helping your liver out, getting your T3 levels in balance, getting your progesterone levels high, and then also making sure there's no inflammation stemming from the gut. Okay. Just want to make sure I don't miss a question. Okay. Are there any recommendations on salts? I have high blood pressure, but I want to occasionally add salt to foods I cook. I heard sea salt is better. Should I go with that? So like I said earlier, one of the worst recommendations on the planet is that people with high blood pressure should restrict salt. It literally makes high blood pressure so much worse, because usually high blood pressure is due to stress, and stress usually stems from mineral deficiencies, specifically sodium and potassium. So a lot of people are told to restrict salt, and then their blood pressure issues get worse and have to be managed by medication. So sodium chloride or table salt is poison. It is not necessarily, I don't want to say it's poison, but a lot of times these salt factories, these salt mines are next to like paint factories. And remember, salt draws things to itself. It has a charge. And so if your salt mountain, there's a mountain of salt that's going to go into your food, and it's sitting next to a paint factory, it's absorbing all those toxins from all around itself. And so the source of your salt matters. And so Celtic sea salt is really good. Himalayan pink salt is really good. And then Morton's like canning salt is also really good. It's really like chunky and bigger. And so those are amazing salts, and a lot of times people with high blood pressure and high stress levels do so incredible when they start implementing high quality salts, because minerals really do lower that blood pressure and make people feel a lot more grounded and calm. But obviously talk to your doctor about it. It's really important to do so, but yeah, always stick to that high quality sea salt. What can I do for migraines or headaches? Always go back to my liver detox strategies. Very regularly, a headache is caused by estrogen, or like a physiological, not a physiological, like a physical imbalance. So your neck's really tight, your spine's imbalanced, that kind of thing. But if you're getting it cyclically at a certain time, a lot of times it's due to estrogen. And so for me, like when I get an estrogen headache, I do 4 tablespoons. I just make sure to add chlorophyll to my water throughout the day. I usually do like 4 tablespoons. I will do an Epsom salt bath to get myself sweat out those toxins, get a lot of magnesium in. And then I do this trick where I put like some diluted peppermint oil on my temples, and I'll stick my feet in hot water. Like I'll just fill the sink with hot water, put my feet in hot water, but then take a bag of like peas or something frozen and put it on the back of my neck. And that usually really, really helps out. And remember, you have like some lymph nodes that kind of stick around all around here, and even can get stagnant like underneath, like right at the base of your skull. And so just putting some pressure on those things can be very helpful. Are spicy foods good for your body, like peppers? I find that like sometimes if your gut's inflamed, they can be a little harsh on the gut, but they can be really beneficial. I think it's very relative to the person when it comes to spicy foods. Like some people get like serious heartburn and, like it bothers them, their butt burns, that kind of thing. You don't want it if your body's not reacting well. But if you feel good on them and they don't really tend to bother you, then I wouldn't worry about it. Like I always say, don't make things out of things that don't exist, but also on the other hand, if your body's not reacting well, then don't eat it. With water intake, is the rule of thumb half your body weight a good measure? It's kind of a good measure, but I just recommend kind of drinking when you're thirsty, honestly. While taking levothyroxine 25 micrograms, will the blood work show up if there is an issue like T3 and T4? Yeah, so levothyroxine only provides you with T4. So if you're not converting it to T3, it will be reflected in your T3 levels usually. Is it okay to get tooth-colored filling? How can you avoid fillings? Yeah, I wouldn't really worry about it. Like, it is what it is. I recommend always rinsing after you eat every time. Never let stuff sit on your teeth. And take good care of your teeth. Oil pull, floss every single day, brush your teeth with a natural toothpaste, that kind of thing. But, you know, sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do. All right, you guys, perfect timing. No more questions, and Instagram's cutting me off, but thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your guys' time, and I hope you learned a lot. These will be live for 24 hours, and then I will be posting them up on YouTube. I'm a little bit behind on that, but they will be up there. All right, I'll see you guys soon.